Factoring is the heart of algebra. It's the most important skill in algebra. It builds on a few other important skills in algebra, and it's more important than all the other algebra skills combined. If you're taking advanced tests like the GRE or the GMAT, you'll be surprised at how many problems require factoring. And in fact, even more problems can be done very quickly with factoring, where you can solve them without factoring. It just takes like 45 minutes. It can take a 45-minute problem and turn it into a 5-second problem. So let's first talk about what factoring is. And in order to do that, we need to look at the reverse of factoring, distribution. I'm going to start off with this problem. Let's say I have a plus 3 times a plus 5. And just to review what you do here, we're going to do a times a. I'm going to draw a little multiplication arrow here to get a squared plus, I got a times 5, or 5a, plus 3 times a, draw a little multiplication arrow underneath. That gets me 3a, plus 3 times 5, which is 15. I'm going to see, are there any like terms? And there are. 5a and 3a, those are like terms. So I can write this as a squared plus 8a plus 15. Factoring is the reverse of that process. It means you would start out with something like a squared plus 8a plus 15, and the question would say, well, figure out what two things you multiply together to get this. In this case, you can see the answer is obviously going to be a plus 3 times a plus 5, but if you hadn't already just seen this, that might be hard to do. Factoring is a test not just of math, but also of resilience. Most people who can factor just fine give up after 1 or 2 tries. And the simple fact is, with factoring, sometimes you're going to need 5, 6, 10, or even 15 tries. A very hard factoring problem might require even more. So factoring is not a thing you're going to necessarily get right on your first attempt. It's going to require a lot of patience and a lot of resilience, but if you stick with it, with each individual factoring problem, you'll be able to do it, and you'll eventually start getting faster and faster at it. Let's take a look at how you would then do a factoring problem. Let's say the question is, what is, give me 1 second here. Let's say the question is a squared plus 7a plus 12. And I need to figure out what two things multiply together to get a squared plus 7a plus 12. And the way to do it, here's the trick you need to remember. Just focus on the first term and the last term. Make sure that when you do it, you get the a squared, and make sure you get the 12. Don't worry about the middle term. The middle term is just a distraction. It's not your friend. Don't even pay attention to it. So the first thing I want to say is, how do I get the a squared? Well, to get an a squared, I'm going to need to have an a times an a here and an a here. All right? And then I'm going to try to get the 12. There's a lot of things that multiply out to 12. I could do 6 and 2, 4 and 3, 12 and 1. I'll try 6 and 2. So I can do a times a, that's a squared. A times 2, which is plus 2a. 6 times a, which is plus 6a. And then 6 times 2, which is 12. And I get a squared plus 8a plus 12. All right, we have kind of like a good news, bad news situation here. The really good news is that I got the first term and the last term. That's awesome. I got a squared and I got 12. Middle term is close, but it's not there. So you know what I'm going to do? I already tried 6 and 2. Now I'm going to try something else. And let me just clear up a little space here. We already tried a plus 6 and a plus 2. Now we're going to try something different. All right, so 6 and 2 didn't work. All right, let's try 4 and 3. Let's see if that gets us anything better. Start with a times a, that's a squared, plus a times 3, that's 3a. Let's put a little multiplication arrow below. We get plus 4a plus 12. So I see, are there any like terms? Yeah, there are. 3a and 4a, those are like terms. So I get a squared plus 7a plus 12. And that matches. So the answer to the problem is a plus 4 times a plus 3. So that's the factored form. So if someone says factor this, the answer is a plus 4 times a plus 3. Now, sometimes you're going to have more negative numbers. I mean, sometimes you'll have all kinds of things. Let's do an example of that. So let's say I have, let me get that pen back here. Let's say that I have a squared minus 2a minus 8. Now, here's where people get tripped up. You know why? Because they start focusing on the middle term, in this case the 2a. Don't focus on the middle term, just focus on the first term and the last term. So I'm going to start out with, let's say, I'm going to make sure that I get an a squared and a negative 8. Not 8, and think of that as a minus 8. So if I want to get a minus 8, then these two signs have to be different, right? You know, a positive times a negative is a negative. A negative times a negative is going to be a positive, so don't do that, obviously. So a plus, and I need to multiply it out to get a negative 8. I don't know, what are the things that get you 8? I can try an 8 and a 1, all right? And I can multiply these out. I do a times a, that's a squared. A times minus 1, I'm going to call that as negative 1a, or just negative a, or minus a. 8a, a times a, that's 8a, and that's a plus. Why? Because it's plus a positive 8, plus 8a. And 8 times negative 1 is minus 8. So I get a squared. Negative a plus 8a, that's like negative 1 plus 8, or positive 7a minus 8. All right, so I didn't get it, but the good news is I got the first term and the last term right. So I tried 8 and negative 1. I'm just going to try something different now. And with something like this, I might end up trying 5 or 6 or however many things that I need to get the answer right. But the whole time I'm focusing on the first term and on the last term. So I'm going to go ahead and make some parentheses here. I'm going to obviously make sure to get the a's right. A times a is a squared. Okay, so what else can I get for negative 8? I could get 4 times 2 is 8. So I could try like negative 4 and positive 2. Well, I do the same process. I get a times a, that's a squared. A times plus 2 is going to be plus 2a. This is a minus 4 times a, so it's going to be minus 4a. And minus 4 times 2 is negative 8. I look for like terms. I see that 2a and 2a minus 4, those are like terms. So I get a squared minus 2a minus 8. And this one actually does get me the result that I want. So the correct answer is this, a minus 4 times a plus 2. Now, the question that a lot of times people have is, why should you focus on the first and last term? Why not focus on the middle term? And I'll do an example. I'll show you why, so you can start to intuitively understand why. Let's say that I have a squared, say plus 7a plus 12. If I focus on the last term, I don't actually have too many options to think about. I have 1 and 12, I have 3 and 4, and I have 6 and 2, and that's it. But if I'm thinking about what adds up to 7, well, it could be 1 and 6, it could be 2 and 5, it could be 3 and 4, it could be 8 and negative 1, it could be 9 and negative 2, it could be 10 and negative 3, it could be 11 and negative 4, and I could go on. In fact, there's an infinite different number of choices of just integers, that's positive and negative whole numbers, that can add up to the 7. Focusing on the first and last term is simply more efficient because there's an infinite number of options that can get you the middle term. The middle term is going to be a distraction. Get the first term and the last term right, and you'll be able to factor almost everything probably in the first, second, third, or occasionally the fourth try. focus on that first and last term, and you're going to be able to factor all kinds of things. Factoring will appear on the vast majority of very, very hard GRE and GMAT questions. If you don't know what to do, if you're stuck on a problem, you know what you should try? Try factoring.